Hello, All About Agatha listeners. So I am headed to England in a few short days to participate in two conferences. First up is the Golden Age of Crime's Silent Echoes, Golden Age Crime Fiction and Trauma. This is being hosted by Golden Age Mysteries and Florida State University's College of Communication and Information. I'll be speaking about whether and how Agatha Christie's novels are cozy. And yes, I did manage to connect that to the theme of trauma that runs throughout all the papers that are being presented at that conference. So that's happening on the 12th and 13th of September in London at Florida State University's London Study Center. And then a few days after that, I will be heading down to Torquay and presenting a solo panel on Agatha Christie's use of true crime in her fictional stories. That will be happening on Thursday, September 18th at 4:00 p.m. It'll be in the Spanish Barn, where it usually is. My event is actually sold out, so I look forward to seeing those of you who have already bought a ticket, and there's a ton going on at the festival, so even if you can't make it to my event, I hope to see you there and to be able to chat. All of this requires a bit of preparation, of course, which is why I'm bringing you today a summer rerun episode. I am replaying a very early episode from the podcast in which Catherine Brobeck and I talked about the real-life disappearance of Agatha Christie. I won't be going into Christie's disappearance whatsoever at my talk at the festival concerning true crime and Agatha Christie. But given that this is a major real-life event that happened, I thought that this episode would dovetail nicely with my panel talk, which will be my next episode. I am going to record my live presentation at the festival and then bring it to you one day later, which will be 2 weeks from today. If you would like some new content from me today, I am also releasing a Patreon episode all about P.D. James's A Mind to Murder. That's her second Adam Dalgleish novel. Love me some P.D. James. As usual, there's a link to Patreon in the show notes. Otherwise, I hope you enjoy this early episode. Because it is an early episode, the audio quality is fairly terrible. It took us so long to iron out our audio issues. And this one is a bit echoey, a bit rough, but your ears should adjust after a minute or two. And I think the content of this episode is really interesting. I also just have to say, because I listened to this episode before rerunning it today, my thinking on the disappearance of Agatha Christie has evolved a bit since this early episode, which was released in February 2017. The podcast was about 6 months old at that point, and we decided to cover the disappearance of Agatha Christie around that time because we had just reviewed The Murder of Roger Ackroyd, which was the last novel Christie published before she disappeared. So it made sense to grapple with the disappearance when we did. But I feel like I know so much more about Christie and perhaps myself since that episode. I was way more skeptical of the notion that Christie could have acted inadvertently during the disappearance than I am now. And I also made at least one factually incorrect assertion on this episode, which I just have to point out. That is that Christie never spoke about her disappearance in an official capacity after it happened, as Lucy Worsley explores in detail in her recent biography, and as I have acknowledged many times. Agatha Christie explained in a newspaper interview that she was essentially on the brink of what we today might call a nervous breakdown or an episode of mental illness or instability. That wasn't the language that Christie and others used back then, hence allusions to amnesia or a fugue state. I was skeptical on this episode that there could be any sort of intentionality deployed in the midst of such a breakdown. In particular, the way that Christie used the last name of Archie's soon-to-be second wife, Nancy Neal, when signing into that Yorkshire hotel. She signed the register as Teresa Neal. That felt like evidence to me that she had to know what she was doing. I'm not so sure now. And I think it's important that we give Christie's own words on what she went through their proper weight and consideration. So I'm just calling myself out here. I approach this issue with a lot more humility than I think I do on this episode from 2017. I also think that Catherine Brobeck's take here in this conversation we had was much closer to what mine has become. So once again, Catherine was right. It just took me a few years to realize it. I know she would love to hear me say that. So that was for you, Catherine. I'm sure that my thoughts on this rather thorny topic of Christie's disappearance will continue to change because it's a fairly dynamic topic, but that's also why it interests so many people. So I hope that you enjoy this summer rerun about what went down nearly 100 years ago now in December of 1926. So please enjoy, and I'll see you soon. Some of you in person in England. Bye for now. Welcome to All About Agatha, the podcast dedicated to reading and ranking every single mystery novel written by the Queen of Crime, Dame Agatha Christie. I'm Kemper Donovan.
I'm Catherine Brobeck.
And we have a very special episode today. We mentioned that
very special.
That we mentioned we would be talking about the real life disappearance of Agatha Christie. So in this episode, we are actually not reviewing a short story. We are not taking a look at a novel. Next week, we will be looking at the mystery of the Blue Train. But for this week, we are in real life because the only unsolved Agatha Christie mystery is the one that involved the woman herself. I'd actually like to begin talking about this with a memory of mine. When I was around 10 is when I started really getting into Agatha Christie. And I just remember once I was sitting around my house reading, I don't remember which novel, but it was probably a Miss Marple, since Miss Marple was definitely my favorite. And my grandmother, who was born in 1919, so was still a child in the 20s, but certainly had recollection of things that were happening in the 20s. She saw that I was reading an Agatha Christie novel and she said, "Oh, that's that woman who went missing and she did it for the publicity, just to sell her books." And that's the first time that I heard about this whole issue of Agatha Christie having actually disappeared. And I don't really know if off of that I then looked into it, but it's this kind of question mark that hangs over Agatha Christie, and that most dedicated readers or fanatics of Agatha Christie find out about or grapple with at some point, which is why we wanted to devote an episode to it, because it's very strange that this writer of mysteries actually had a mysterious episode herself, and that we really still to this day don't know exactly why or exactly what happened, although we can, I think, get pretty close at an educated guess. So with that in mind, let's jump into the facts that we do have about this. Here is what we know. On Friday, December 3rd, 1926, and this is right after Agatha Christie had published The Murder of Roger Ackroyd, which we discussed recently, Agatha Christie disappeared from the house where she lived. That house just so happened to be called Styles. Yes, she and Archie Christie named it after the fictional estate in her first novel. It's a little cheesy, I think, but they did them. And
did they name it that, or was it named that before?
Oh no, they named it that.
Oh, that's really weird,
isn't it? It's a little bougie.
Just a little.
Although using a word like bougie is bougie too. So anyway, on Friday, December 3rd, 1926, Agatha Christie disappeared from Styles, leaving behind her 7-year-old daughter, Rosalind, who, as we know, that was the only child that she had with her estranged husband, Archie. And she also left behind her treasured pet dog, Peter.
Things had been rocky for quite some time, I think, with Archie. Not just recently, but for quite a while, due to the fact that he was carrying on an affair with a friend named Nancy Neal, who, like himself, was an avid golfer. And I would point out that it was actually Agatha who introduced Archie to golfing. Agatha was kind of like a casual golfer, I think, and then she wanted an activity with him, but then he became really, 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 really into golfing.
Yeah, he became obsessed, and she was a good golfer. She actually won some tournament. I remember she kind of humble bragged about that in her autobiography, but she was not nearly as obsessed with it as he was.
No, but you know who was? Nancy Neal.
She loved her golf.
She loved her golf and she loved her Archie. Agatha actually liked Nancy. She knew her. And so she kind of like overlooked things and she overlooked the problems with Archie. But it was Archie who decided that he just couldn't. He was just done. So there's like a lot of evidence that the problems predated Nancy. He had problems that she gained weight after she gave birth with Rosalind, and like that was a problem for him. He basically thought she was fat. He was mean about it, and he couldn't get a job, and he was mean about that. And then when she started making money from the books, she kept it to herself. Let me put it that way. She basically held the purse strings, which, like, honestly, a little bit understandable when he was being kind of controlling to begin with. She got her own. And so, like, why not control it?
It is, although I think especially for the time, that was a pretty bitter pill to swallow as the man of the house, to feel like he was not the primary breadwinner and didn't have access to any of those funds that he basically had to ask permission for. I'm not saying it wasn't justified. It's just there are many men, I think, especially of that time, who would have been as frustrated as he was.
No, I think there are most men now frustrated, to be completely honest. But I mean, I would also note that Agatha's mother, Clarissa, apparently had a problem with him in large part because he actually, when they got married, he wasn't making any money.
Yeah.
Or when they started courting, rather.
She never had a good feeling about him. And that's also another contributing factor. Agatha's mother had died 8 months previous to this episode. And Agatha was distraught about it, and Archie apparently was not all that understanding. I mean, to be fair, or to attempt to be fair, or even handed to Archie, a lot of the information we have is coming from the Agatha camp.
Yeah,
because it's mainly coming from either her autobiography or family friends in authorized writings or biographical, whatever. So it's hard to know what the real story is there in terms of whose fault it was that their marriage is falling apart. But suffice to say, their marriage really was falling apart. And on the morning of the 3rd, Agatha's personal secretary left Styles early in the day for London. And then later that day, we know that Agatha drove to her mother-in-law's house, to Archie's mother's house, with Rosalind and Peter the dog. And they had tea. Then they drove home. Agatha put Rosalind to bed. And then she left a letter saying she was going out for a drive and left the house around 9:45 p.m. dressed in a warm knitted outfit, a fur coat, a velour hat, and low-heeled shoes with buckles, which were quote-unquote sensible walking shoes.
And she would not be seen again for 11 days, at least not as Agatha Christie.
On the morning of Saturday, December 4th, her car, which was that Morris Cowley she so proudly bought for herself with her man in the brown suit money, that was when she first felt like she was a successful author. The Morris Cowley was discovered abandoned in a neighboring county about an hour away, I believe, from Styles, at the edge of a chalk pit with its headlights on. Agatha's fur coat was inside, as well as a dressing case containing various articles of clothing, and also her driver's license. So already it's just so weird. This sounds like the setup for one of her stories, but this is actually what happened to her.
It does. And also, I just want to emphasize that Morris Cowley, she bought it. Archie had to have permission to drive it.
Hey, you know what? Archie didn't write the man in the brown suit. You want a Morris Cowley? You create a character as delightful as Anne Bedingfield. Archie?
Exactly that. So Archie, guess what? He wasn't there because guess where he was? He was spending the weekend with some family friends, including, Nancy Neal.
Nancy Neal.
Unfortunately, the police show on up there and drag him back to Styles to figure out what on earth is going on because now his wife's missing. And of course, who is suspect number one in any of these cases?
The husband. Never trust the husband.
And really the case here, because don't trust him.
No, I mean, it got very awkward because the more information that came out about the state of their marriage, Archie was not forthcoming with that information, mainly because he was embarrassed. So he was hiding information. The information was coming out during these 11 days when Agatha was missing. It really was a legitimate theory that he had killed her, or that he at least knew more than he did. So the obvious parallel here, and we've mentioned this book before, is Gone Girl, the plot that this woman's going to disappear to mess with her husband's life. And perhaps Agatha was doing the same thing. We'll get to that later.
Had she shown up before I think the weekend was over, maybe it would have been less of a big deal. But the second she didn't, it all of a sudden became this increasingly big source of speculation because people began to realize that the car belonged to Mrs. Christie, famous mystery novelist. And
somewhat famous. We'll get to that. But she was a known author, but she had not achieved the level of fame that she would go on to achieve. But yeah, once it got into Monday, she went missing on a Friday. By Monday, the newspapers started really hitting it hard day after day. And people just love speculating. Did she kill herself? Did she fall into the chalk pit? Did she wander away from the car and expose herself to the elements? Where the car was found was actually not very far from where Archie had been spending his weekend getaway with Nancy Meal. So did she go and confront them? And then maybe Archie lured her away to this remote spot where he murdered her. There were just all sorts of speculations going on. And people did from the beginning also wonder if it was a hoax that was meant to embarrass an unfaithful husband or perhaps even to sell books. A lot of her books were being serialized or began to be serialized during this disappearance, which made people very suspicious. So there were really just endless possibilities. One of my favorite in terms of the supernatural hijinks that were going on, it actually involves Arthur Conan Doyle, of course, famed author of the Sherlock Holmes series. And we should cite our sources because we're relying heavily on one book in particular, which is Jared Cade's Agatha Christie and the 11 Missing Days, which gives an extremely thorough recounting of the times leading up to the disappearance itself, and then the years after. But Cade mentions that Arthur Conan Doyle actually obtained a glove of Agatha's and then gave it to a medium whose name was Horace Leaf. Pretty fantastic name. And Doyle claimed, this is Doyle speaking, I gave him no clue at all as to what I wanted or to whom the article belonged. He never saw it until I laid it on the table at the moment of consultation, and there was nothing to connect either it or me with the Christie case. He at once got the name Agatha. So apparently Arthur Conan Doyle was a believer, which is funny since the Holmes series also tends to delight
He was a massive believer.
But the Holmes series is also rooted in logic and reason.
It is, but he became a massively obsessive fan of the occult in the early 20th century.
I didn't know that.
Yeah.
It's interesting.
Really, really, really into the occult.
Even with the disappearance of Agatha. So just lots of stuff like that going on. And here's also where things get a little meta. And I'm so glad that we just aired our episode of the jewel robbery at the Grand Metropolitan, because we mentioned in that episode how there was this jokey runner through the Suchet adaptation where people kept on going up to Poirot and mistaking him for Lucky Lem, who was this Where's Waldo sort of character that people could search for through clues and photos in a newspaper. And if they found him, they would get £10.
Stop! You are Lucky Len of the Daily Echo, and I claim my 10 guineas.
No, madame, I am not Len, and therefore for you, I am not lucky. Excuse me.
That was inspired by a real newspaper ploy, which was Lobby Ludd, not Lucky Lem, but Lobby Ludd, where this Lobby Ludd character would be photographed, and then there would be clues given as to where he was, and the first person to rush up with a copy of his newspaper picture and say, "You are Mr. Lobby Ludd, and I hereby claim my £10," would be rewarded on the spot. That whole activity was actually inspired by the furor over the disappearance of Agatha Christie herself, because there was a £100 reward for any information, and it just must have increased circulation and sales of the newspapers so much that the newspapers were like, let's capitalize on this. So it's just really funny. I don't know if they were even aware in the Suchet series of that connection. Maybe.
They must have
give
been.
them the benefit of the doubt.
They must have been.
So it's just really funny that they're imitating something real, which was imitating something that happened based on the life of the creator of that fictional creation. It's all very circular. Anyway.
After she disappeared, so like a little more than a week, on Sunday, the 12th of December, 2 members of the hotel band at a swanky, extremely private hotel called the Harrogate Hydropathic Hotel.
The Harrogate Hydro.
In Yorkshire.
For those in the know, the Harrogate Hydro.
In Yorkshire, went to the police and they said, hey, guess what? Agatha Christie staying at the hotel where we work. And then the police were like, oh, perhaps we should interview some people at the Harrogate Hydro. And they did. And
it was her.
It was Mrs. Christie.
It was her. So here's then what we know from those who were at the Harrogate Hydro during this period when Agatha Christie had disappeared. We know that Agatha checked into the Harrogate Hydro on Saturday, December 4th under the name Mrs. Teresa Neal. And she said that she was from South Africa. Obviously, the last name she gave was the same last name as Archie's mistress, Nancy Neal. It was spelled exactly the same way with the E at the end. So we're jumping ahead a little bit, but for me, that pretty much destroys the amnesia theory. There's no way that if she had actually lost her memory, she would have, she just happened to use the same last name as the woman who her husband was sleeping with.
Well, I mean, it feels a little bit like if you're going to use that excuse, it's not amnesia, but more like a fugue state of some kind, where you're just like kind of.
So she just, the name came to her in her fugue state because it had become an obsession.
Correct. Yeah.
No. Well, you're right. That's at least, I guess it's at least possible. It's not plausible. I don't think it's plausible, but I guess it's possible.
I'm playing devil's advocate because I actually don't think it makes any sense at all, but playing devil's advocate here. Think about when you're dreaming, how like weird things will come up. If you remember your dream when you wake up, sometimes you'll be like, oh my God, why on earth was that person in my dream?
Mm-hmm.
I kind of feel like if you were like, not that even fugue states probably exist, but like if you were in some version of that, I can kind of see like
that's the thing.
Every single element that you were dwelling on.
I feel like a fugue state is something that people have made up when they're lying about something. I mean, I don't think a fugue state actually exists. There's a great use of a fugue state in Breaking Bad. Remember, Walter White famously tells his wife that he entered a fugue state when he's trying to cover up, and she's like, a fugue state? No.
Honey, we have been over this. Asked and answered, right? There.
Then it got me thinking again about all the strange behavior, not the least of which was the disappearance. Out of my mind with worry, calling hospitals, checking the morgue. Your fugue state? I had to believe that, didn't I? I had to find a way. I mean, who would lie about such a thing?
I mean...
Anyway, let's move on. The other mystery, though, is that she drove away from her house on Friday, December 3rd. She didn't check into the hotel until Saturday, December 4th. So where did she stay on that Friday night? We will get back to that. But according to those who saw this Mrs. Teresa Neal in the hotel, fellow guests, clerks, maids, etc., she was totally normal and pleasant for the week and a half that she was there. And someone even told her at one point that she looked a lot like that missing author, Agatha Christie, and she basically laughed it off.
Right. And she also frequented the Winter Garden Ballroom, where the Harry Cod Dance Band played various numbers for guests. And in fact, the first night she danced, despite not wearing an evening dress, because you know what? She was wearing that knit outfit that she had on when she left Styles.
Mm-hmm. But yeah, she basically rocked out to the Charleston. The band were playing Yes, We Have No Bananas, which just strikes me as kind of funny.
He tells you, yes, of course, we have no bananas. We have no bananas today.
So once all was confirmed, Archie hightailed it up to the hotel in Yorkshire. He saw her in the lobby when she came down and signaled to the police his confirmation that, yep, that was his missing wife. And then they must have had the most awkward dinner in the history of awkward dinners between husbands and wives at the hotel.
God.
I don't really know what they talked about there. Depends on what you believe in terms of why and how she actually disappeared, but we'll get to that. And after that, the official story from Agatha herself and all of her family and friends is that she simply lost her memory. Call it amnesia, call it a fugue state, whatever you want, that it was due to the stress and strain brought on by her work and her mother's death that she just entered this heightened reality, apparently, and somehow managed to get all the way up to this fancy hotel and take this name that happened to be the same name as Nancy Neal's or similar, et cetera, then she was found. Few people were convinced by this, but that was the official story.
No, and she never really spoke on it. It was Archie's statement, right?
Yeah, I mean, we're never going to know exactly what happened. This obviously was a really bizarre series of events. Catherine just played devil's advocate about the possibility of loss of memory, but given the way that this all played out, I think that possibility is infinitesimal. So this has to be a voluntary disappearance. And then the question just becomes, why? Why did she do this? Was she doing it to spite Archie? Was she doing it to boost book sales? Was there another reason? And how exactly did she pull it off as well?
It seems very clear by any account that this was not a publicity stunt. There's no indication that this was a publicity stunt.
I agree.
And so
I actually think that's kind of the most horrible thing to come out of this, that I, as a 10-year-old in the late 80s, would be reading an Agatha Christie book. And even then, over a half century later, that she would be associated with this idea of just trying to get free publicity and creating this mega search that took all these resources away from other police matters. The fact that she was associated with that kind of permanently, or at least in a long-term way, is unfortunate, because I think I agree. It seems like that was not what she was doing here. And I have to imagine that bothered her a lot.
Oh my God. I think she was also clearly having a hard time writing then. And it just, like, nothing about this seems like it was a publicity stunt. And in fact, the ramifications of it, if it was a publicity stunt, certainly weren't worth it.
Well, we'll get to that.
Oh, okay. All right. Okay.
We'll get to that in a second. But so just on the what really happened front, there is a theory that is put forth in Jared Cade's book, which I found persuasive just in that he seemed to have access to a branch of Agatha Christie's family where he was getting this direct evidence. And that branch of the family is her brother-in-law. We've mentioned before her older sister, Madge, who was married to a man named Jimmy Watts. He's one of the people who is credited with giving her the idea for the murder of Roger Ackroyd. One of the two, that right. And Lord Mountbatten. And Jimmy had a sister named Nan. And she was very close with the Watts family in general. Their estate was Abney Hall, which we've also mentioned because that's where she used to go for Christmas every year. That was clearly the setting for the Adventure of the Christmas Pudding.
Secret of Chimneys.
And also the Secret of Chimneys. There was actually a room. We didn't even talk about that. Somehow in our expansive Secret of Chimneys discussion, there was a room in Abney Hall called the Council Chamber, and that's where most of the action happens in The Secret of Chimneys. So clearly she was modeling chimneys on Abney Hall. So just very, very close with Nan Watts. And Jared Cade spoke directly with Nan's daughter Judith and Judith's husband Graham, who essentially told her that Agatha, on that Friday where she has that missing night, where did she go? She spent the night with Nan. And Nan's husband wasn't there at the time, so the two of them were alone. And they essentially plotted this disappearance together. Or at least, I don't know if they plotted it together, but Agatha ran the whole thing by her. And the next day made her way up to Yorkshire. And that the reason for it was, in fact, to hurt Archie. She knew that her marriage was over at this point. They had had that massive argument. This was coming after just a really extended period of bad blood between the two of them. And it was spiteful, I suppose, or I don't want to call it petty. I don't know her life, but it seems to have been motivated. It was a personal motivation. And the whole thing just really spectacularly blew up in her face because she had no idea that it was going to turn into such a worldwide hunt.
It was either that it was spiteful or that it was desperate.
Yeah.
I mean, it was.
I don't. Spiteful is not. I don't think spiteful is fair. I don't think you can assume that someone's being spiteful. I agree. Desperate is more appropriate.
You know, she was terribly in love with him, and he was not in love with her. And I think that causes people to make poor decisions.
There is a film, we often have film adaptations to discuss at the end of these episodes, and that pattern remains because
boy, do we.
There is a film entitled Agatha that was released in the late 70s starring Vanessa Redgrave as Agatha Christie and Dustin Hoffman as no one, as a fake journalist who was made up for purposes of the movie. But Probably one of the best scenes in the whole movie is the rather brutal breakfast scene between Agatha and Archie.
Oh God,
Archie being played by
Timothy Dalton.
By the very handsome Timothy Dalton. And it is brutal, and that's what it boils down to. She loves him. She wants to make it work. He doesn't love her anymore. He just wants to be rid of her.
Look at me. Look at me. I want a divorce. Will you give me one? Then we must live apart. I shall make arrangements to be out of this house after the weekend.
Oh, don't leave me, no, please, please. Oh, please. Please, I come back. Please.
Dignity.
I think she was desperate, and she was sort of lashing out. And the car had been abandoned near where Archie had been staying. At the very least, it would have disrupted his weekend with Nancy Neal. It would have probably made him worry. It would have made him feel some of the pain on her behalf that she had been feeling on his behalf for so long. But yeah, as Catherine just noted, it did not work out very well. Was not a great decision.
Well, it seems that the reality is she did not anticipate that it would cause the press coverage that it did.
Yeah.
And therein is the problem.
And I don't think that I don't know how anyone would have been able to anticipate it. And we see that happening all the time with certain events to just become these flashpoints that everyone obsesses over. I think it's even more concentrated nowadays with social media. All of a sudden you turn around and everyone's tweeting about Pizza Rat for a day. It's like the memification.
Oh, what are you saying? Are you saying
Pizza
that
Rat.
Pizza Rat was not worth tweeting
It was
about?
charming. It was charming.
Pizza Rat, where's he going with that? Maybe back to his flat. Has he got far to go? Is he scared he'll get fat? I don't think that he cares, 'cause he's running the stairs for his cardio.
But the memification of things, it's the same impulse. It's everyone obsessing over something in a concentrated period of time and just putting all their energies to it. And I guess right place, right time, wrong place, wrong time for poor Agatha. It just happened the way it did, and it was very unfortunate for her. The other aspect that we should explore here is how did it actually affect her career? And I think it had positive and negative effects. We just mentioned just sort of the long-term negative effect in that it just cast a shadow over her entire career in a way. I mean, that's depressing to say, but I think it did. But in the short term, it certainly boosted her sales.
Yeah, we can talk about it in two ways. We can talk about it in the short term, and in the short term, impact actually impacts the long term too, because she got a massive amount of publicity out of this.
In the Jared Cade book, he does note the fact that you can tell that she wasn't a household name because the Daily Mail's headline was "Woman Novelist Disappears." It's not like people were blaring Agatha Christie. The name was not a household name yet, so you could argue, which I'm sure was very frustrating to her, that this is what established her. That then off of that,
For sure.
It kind of built, and obviously she had to be talented, and she sustained a career for so long after this, but that it's really what got her going. I would say that I still think it's very significant that the murder of Roger Ackroyd predated all of this silliness.
Right.
Because that really, I think, is what started to put her on the map. And that probably is also what, in a way, becomes a chicken or egg thing. The furor over was she playing fair in the murder of Roger Ackroyd. Some people loved that book. Some people hated that book. And that probably added to the intrigue once she actually disappeared, that there might have been some recognition. She wasn't a household name, but she certainly wasn't a random novelist either when this happened.
I think she was well known to a number of people, probably people who are reading detective fiction. Certain well-read people, at least, knew who she was.
I'm sure it did not sit well with her that she sold over 5,000 copies of The Murder of Roger Ackroyd. And then right after the disappearance, The Big Four, which she did again refer to as that rotten book, sold 8,500 copies. I'm sure she was not super pleased about that. She knew that that was just because of her notoriety. Then also The Mystery of the Blue Train, which again is the book we'll be discussing next. That one sold extremely well, and she hated that book too. I mean, she just, this was not a good time. And I guess a short-term kind of boost in sales, it's like she managed to get over this ugly period in her life. She granted Archie the divorce. She went on a vacation to the Canary Islands with Rosalind. She tried to patch up her relationship, presumably with her daughter as well. I mean, her daughter was only 7 at this point. Interestingly, and again, I'm going to refer to the movie here, but in that fictional depiction of the story, and then there is also a Hollywood film in development currently that is also taking its stab at what happened during the disappearance. And in both those fictional tellings, I think it's interesting that Rosalind doesn't exist.
They get rid of Rosalind.
And I think they do that for 2 reasons. One, it makes her desperation a lot more interesting in that she wants to stay with Archie because she's just desperately in love with him, and perhaps it's romantic in a little bit of a Heathcliff Kathy sort of a way. I think Heathcliff and Kathy are even directly referenced in the Vanessa Redgrave
in
movie.
The 1979 movie. Yeah, they are.
It's a little bit more mundane, perhaps, that she really wanted to keep the family together, that she hated the idea that Rosalind wasn't going to have both parents in the same house. Then also, it's honestly pretty messed up that she disappeared for 11 days on her 7-year-old daughter.
I suppose you could say that. At the same time, you could also note that Agatha and Archie decided to go around the world and just dump their daughter with Madge, right?
Yeah, when she was 3 years old. Yeah.
Yeah, when she was 3 years old. And on top of that, I mean, the fact that Archie was just cheating.
Absolutely.
And didn't care. Yeah, it's really messed up to disappear and leave your kid with the nanny for 11 days. But at the same time, it's not like you could really give massive points to Archie on this.
No, absolutely. They're both in the wrong here.
She looks worse because mothers always look worse. The mother abandoning the kid is always going to look worse than the father abandoning the kid.
That's true. It's more loaded. It's more culturally loaded. That's for sure.
Yeah.
So the one other thing that I think is really interesting in terms of analyzing how this affected her career is to talk about something we've touched on a little bit before, which is that there is, you could argue, a dividing line between early Christie and later Christie in terms of the tone of a lot of her books. Mm-hmm. And we've talked a lot about how she was writing these Poirot short stories in the Sketch magazine. And again, we haven't gone over all of them, but she wrote about 50 of them in this period before the disappearance in the mid-20s. And she also was writing those breezy thrillers, The Man in the Brown Suit, The Secret of Chimneys, The Secret Adversary even. And to me, the archetype of this period in her writing is that pert, peppy young woman, the Tuppence in Secret Adversary, or Anne Bedingfeld in The Man in the Brown Suit, or even Virginia Revel. Dare I bring up Virginia Revel in The Secret of Chimneys?
No, please don't.
Agatha herself clearly identified with these people. I think you could argue convincingly that was to a certain extent how she saw herself. And then after the disappearance, there is definitely a shift. The Poirot novels themselves turn a little bit darker, which is a reason why the Suchet series, which adapted a lot of those short stories in the earlier seasons and then started doing the novels, it's one of the reasons I think why that series went more somber. And then really interestingly, because we're about to get to her, this is when Miss Marple came about. And I never thought about it this way, but Miss Marple is pretty much the exact opposite in every way that one could be opposite of those pert and perky young women. She's old, she's jaded, she's cynical, she suffers no fools, and she kind of seems like Agatha on the other side of this, just having a lot more life experience and not being as
romantic,
bright-eyed and not being as romantic and just not being as bright-eyed and idealistic about the world as she used to be. It's a little sad, but it's actually kind of awesome because it also gave us Miss Marple. So
I think the idea of being a romantic is really the thing that disappears. I mean, Anne Bedingfield is such a romantic. She runs off and goes and lives by Victoria Falls, in a shack with a guy. She just believes kind of in all of this potential for her future and all of these things that may be, and she has all this faith in this man. And I think that you can kind of say the same about Tommy and Tuppence. And obviously we've only had one Tommy and Tuppence book and they're going to come up again. It's not like they have gone off the radar,
No, but I think you could argue that their relationship even changes. I mean, they are an established married couple the next time that we see them. And the way that she portrays him in Secret Adversary is very romantic. And also, let's, again, I know I keep on going back to Virginia Revel just to torture you, Catherine, but Virginia Revel and Anthony Cade end up essentially as a king and queen. They do. They become the king and queen of an entire country. That, if that's not romantic, I don't know what is. And that just gets compare that to Miss Marple musing about how people in these small villages are just as evil and awful as people in big cities, and never having the wool pulled over her eyes and sitting in her house and garden in St. Mary, in this little corner of St. Mary Mead. It's so different. And I never thought about it or noticed it, because I think that's also what comes of looking at these in order. But this experience, and is part of the larger experience of the dissolution of her marriage, like that's really what it is, I think clearly had an effect on her writing.
Yeah, and I think that a lot of the impulses that we can point to of surprising brutality in some of the short stories in particular, we have not really seen that impulse so much in the novels that we've covered. It has come up in the short stories, probably just because they're short, but I think that we will continue to see that more so in the novels from this point forward.
Yeah. Let's talk about Agatha the movie, which came out in 1979. Again, Vanessa Redgrave, Dustin Hoffman, Timothy Dalton, Michael Apted was the director. That sounds like a fantastic lineup.
It does. And you know what? It's kind of beautifully shot in a like late 1970s way. Like movies like Julia really came up when I was thinking about it.
It is shot in a beautiful way. I just there's a certain way that they did period in the 70s that is just very lush. And I got that sense from this.
It has that sort of ambiance of like late 1970s, early 1980s period pieces set in Europe. And there's an appeal to that, I think. It just happens to maybe not work so well in this. I think the movie thinks that it's more romantic than it is.
Yeah, I think that it mainly boils down to story problems and maybe actually not even chemistry, because Dustin Hoffman and Vanessa Redgrave have a weird chemistry. It's not necessarily a romantic chemistry, but they do have some sort of a weird connection going on in this movie. But it certainly is not the high romanticism that they think it is, that Michael Apted at least seems to think it was.
No. I don't mean to be mean about this, but Vanessa Redgrave has to be like 4 or 5 inches taller than Dustin Hoffman.
Well,
right?
I looked it up because there is in the scene where there's a scene where they're playing pool together, and then we cut to them dancing, and
which is the sexy. By the way, the pool scene is the sexiest. That has the most chemistry I've seen in the whole thing.
Yeah, no, that's true. But it's really surprising, because I think in most films and TV shows, there's just a lot done to make the man appear to be taller than, or at least as tall as the woman, even when that's not the case. Well, with platforms or shoes or whatever.
Right.
So I looked this up. Dustin Hoffman is 5'6". And Vanessa...
Oh my gosh, really?
Which I knew he was short. I didn't realize he was that short. And Vanessa Redgrave is 5'11". So there's 5 inches of height between them, and they just roll with it. It's actually kind of refreshing. He is significantly shorter than her, but I agree, it's hard. It's a hard visual to get past as you're watching them dance. And there's even a moment when she kisses him, when she has to bend her neck down, and they just make such a big deal of it that they clearly just decided. It's another one of these. This movie is just full of odd choices that don't really work, but are interesting to watch, even though they're not working.
The premise of the movie, just to be clear, is basically that he's an American journalist and he's writing a story about Agatha Christie, and he happens to be writing it when exactly she goes missing. And so he happens to be the one who figures out where she's gone. And so he then checks himself into Harrogate and befriends her at the hotel so that he can, I guess, report back on her, but then ultimately he falls in love with her in the 11 days there.
Exactly. He falls in love with her. So he was trying to get to know her for all the wrong reasons, but then it became real, like any good romantic comedy or drama. The other part is that Agatha Christie is at the Harrogate Hydro, not just to hide out, but she has followed Nancy Neal there. and Nancy Neal is his secretary in this version, is Archie's secretary. And we think the entire time that she's plotting to kill Nancy Neal because there's all of this funny business going on with the electric therapy that's attached to the water.
Terrifying.
It's really terrifying. It's like there's lots of shots of people sitting in tubs with wires coming out of the tub, and it just seems absurd. But anyway, it's hydroelectric
Although
therapy.
apparently a weight loss technique.
Apparently, yeah, Nancy Neal is the Regina George of the mid-20s, and she's just trying to lose 3 pounds.
I really want to lose 3 pounds.
Oh my God, what are you talking about?
You're so skinny. Shut up.
And Agatha's just giving her high protein bars.
Agatha giving her calcium bars. So we think that she's plotting to kill Nancy Neal with this hydroelectric chamber of horrors, but it turns out that she's actually trying to kill herself, and she's inducing Nancy Neal in a devious way to be the one who technically pulls the switch, so that it's a kind of poetic justice that since she's already killed her interior life, she's going to kill her exterior life, and then perhaps have to pay for it with her own life, or certainly her life would be destroyed, which would then destroy Archie. So it's this elaborate revenge plan. And she totally goes through with it, by the way. It's just that Dustin Hoffman, the American journalist...
a little bit surprising.
I know. I thought there would be this crisis of conscience moment and she wouldn't go through with it, but she completely goes through with it and is in the middle of getting electrocuted. And Vanessa Redgrave really...
sells that.
She really does. She really does. And she...
like spasming out of a chair, electrocuted.
And Dustin Hoffman runs in and flicks the switch sooner than it would have otherwise, and thereby saves her. But
and it's like smoking, though, by the way.
Oh my God, it's Mrs. Christie.
Yeah, and there's this extended sequence where he's not really giving her CPR. He's just sort of shaking her and screaming and bellowing.
Don't go away, Agatha. Breathe. Breathe. Breathe.
She's dead. She's dead. I know she's dead. What are we going to do?
Come on. Breathe. 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 Again. Again. Again.
When Dustin Hoffman gets his inevitable Lifetime Achievement Award, I don't know if that's going to be in the clip show.
No, I mean, I think, you'll have some Graduate, you'll have some Kramer versus Kramer.
Sure.
Maybe you won't have this scene.
Maybe you'll even have some Hook. So, he saves Agatha's life, and then Agatha realizes the error of her ways and that she has to grant Archie the divorce and move on.
We've skipped over the swimming scene, which I just feel like is the most important scene in the movie.
Oh my God. Yeah.
Because you get Dustin Hoffman in a creepy bathing suit.
In like an old-timey 20s bathing suit, which essentially looks like the first shot of him swimming over, it's from above, you see his back, and I thought it was a woman because it's one of those old-timey male bathing suits that it's a one piece, and it looks like a woman's bathing suit.
She's like clinging to the side of the pool with like her swimming cap on.
Yeah, with her bathing cap. Yeah, this was actually, and that was the point of the movie when I got really annoyed as well, and I was able to put my finger on what about Vanessa Redgrave's performance and just the angle they were taking on Agatha Christie, like why it annoyed me, because they really just play her as she's such a victim in this movie. And it's like,
for sure,
Agatha Christie was perhaps the first Westerner to surf standing up in Hawaii with Archie on her 1922 round the world trip. She grew up in Torquay. She was actually an excellent swimmer, and she was a very vivacious and vibrant person. And yet she also was a mess and devastated by it's like illusion of her marriage. You can do both. You can be a complicated person and have both. You don't have to be a quivering mess. And that's kind of how Vanessa Redgrave plays her.
It's not even Vanessa Redgrave's fault. No. The movie writes her as a quivering mess who can't swim, and who Dustin Hoffman, he's like, I'll hold your chin up above water, and teaches her how to like float.
It reminded me, not in a good way, of the scene in Dirty Dancing when Patrick Swayze teaches Jennifer Grey, aka Baby, how to do the lift in the water, because that scene works.
Right, let's do it again. Okay. All right. 1, 2, 3.
Oh, sorry.
Good. No.
That is a very poppy as hell and actually romantic scene, whereas this is just, again, kind of weird, and I see what they were going for, but it doesn't really work, and it's odd. This movie is just, it's a bizarre movie.
It really is. I mean, I just think the thing that is the worst bit about it is that you can be a complex person. And I think that's also one of the worst things about the disappearance, because either she looks like she's manipulative, which she probably was being,
Sure.
or she looks like she was this almost suicidal, amnesiac,
mess,
mess. You know what? You can be a hot mess who is also really capable and really interesting, and you can do well on your own, but you just happen to be having a really bad 11 days.
And unfortunately, she was so scarred by the press coverage that she never made a statement, obviously, about it. She never spoke about it. Her autobiography goes into such detail about almost every other aspect of her life and does not even mention the disappearance, which was a big disappointment to people because it came out after her death, and people figured, okay, finally she's going to come clean about what actually happened, and she just didn't. And that's also part of why it is this shadow over her, because it's the one enduring mystery of Agatha Christie.
She's a bad reputation for shallow characters, right?
Mm-hmm.
And some of it is deserved.
Sure.
But I think a lot of that also has to do with the fact that we like to read authorial intent into books.
Mm-hmm.
And we like to do a lot of that through our knowledge of the authors. And what she did heavily after this was just shut it down.
Yeah.
Nobody had access to her life. You know, she didn't give interviews. She was not a very public figure. She was polite, I guess, but like very, very much on the surface. And so I think when we talk a lot about how her books operate on a superficial level, we're also talking about the notion that we can't imbue whatever quality we see in her into the books.
It's like she wasn't providing a context that many other authors just naturally provided by virtue of being out in the world and at least doing occasional press and publicity. She just completely X'd it out. That's interesting.
You can be Salinger and you can just disappear completely, and then people are going to read something into that too. But the fact that she always kind of existed, but nobody was allowed to know her.
Yeah, it's like you can be a complete black hole like Salinger was and just be a total mystery. But it's like and it's what's so unsatisfying about this whole disappearance episode, because it's this weird thing that isn't ever going to be completely explained.
No.
It's just awkward.
I feel bad about it because it's like, I don't, it is awkward, but it is understandable in some way. It's understandable, that impulse. This was the first phase of her life. She really loved him. This fell apart on her exactly at the moment when she was having all the success. And
it's understandable, and it's bad luck. I think what it boils down to is bad luck.
Yeah.
Also, she made a rash decision based purely on what was going on in her life at the time, and she didn't really think it through. And plenty of people make just as bad decisions and don't have nationwide manhunts after them as a result.
Right. And I mean, it does, I think, color how we read the before and after, insofar as what she publishes.
Yeah, and I think at least what we can do is do her the service of thinking about it in terms of the greater context of what was going on with her life. Not that this disappearance was this life-altering event, but that she clearly had an extended period over a number of years of a trauma, which was the dissolution of her marriage and also the death of her mother. But I think the dissolution of her marriage to the father of her child and her first love.
And we should also note, she does not divorce him immediately after this.
No, I know. I mean, she did not want to divorce him. She was brought up to, being a wife and a mother was the most important thing to her. And she truly had to be forced to do this, and she was. And there are many that say she never got over it. We'll talk more about what she went on to do, obviously professionally, but even personally. And she still, she has a fascinating life to live after this, but it was important for us all. So on that cheery note, we are back next week with a novel, The Mystery of the Blue Train. Join us then. In the meantime, you can follow us on Twitter, as always, at All About the Dame. You can follow me personally at Kemper Donovan. You can follow Catherine at Brobcat. We would love to hear from you via email at allaboutthedame@gmail.com. You can also follow us on Instagram at allaboutthedame and also on Facebook. Just go onto facebook.com/allaboutagatha. And that is all. See you next week.
See you next week.
Bye.
Bye.